Yeah, right. All right, so we'll just go ahead and roll. If anybody jumps on, that's great. I want to show you guys real quick. If you ever, most of the forms you will need will be in DocuSign. You know, the staff's done a really good job of getting those in there. But if you ever need a form that you can't find, I every time I teach this class or any other class, this is how I get there. Missouri Real Estate Forms. Just Google it and it'll pop up. And the first one that says standard forms is the one you want to click on. It'll bring you to the Missouri Realtor page. You can go right down here and click this Forms Are Us. It will require your login information, which I'm not going to do because I'm already logged in, this is your NERDS number and then whatever password. And if you don't have one, you can set one up really quickly. But if you ever need all the forms, that's where they are. So, and then it looks like this, and they're nicely libraried. So if you need, specifically for disclosures or whatever, so you can go in and find them. So today we're going to talk about land, and truly I am going to touch on the main differences between the land contracts and the residential contracts, because most often we're going to be dealing with the residential contracts. You'll be more familiar with that. So I want to point out the differences more so in this. And if you've got specific questions about areas of the contract, absolutely stop me and let's talk about it. So the first things first, we want to get the agency with this particular, whoever's got this vacant piece of land. And this is the one I want, the exclusive right to sell. Log in again, hang on. Well, for crying out loud. All right, now we're back in. So I'm going to come down to the land and we're going to talk about, first of all, getting this actual person under our employee to make sure they've employed us. So this is going to look, again, very similar. Who actually owns the property? So goes the seller's name. Keller Williams goes in this blank. If you have section, township, and range, you can use that. If you don't, just leave those blank and use the actual street address. So if it's already 911, you can do that. If neither of that applies, you can put C attached in this blank and then actually attach whatever you've got that describes that property. Plots, yeah, I mean, however you want to do it. So if you don't have a specific address or a specific way to identify that property, then put C attached, and then on that put across the top of that put property address. Actually label that document property address, and then have everybody sign it, and that effectively becomes whatever this section is. So if you don't have it, there are ways to do it. I would rather you not use this legal description box to A, in general, and B, to use to describe the actual property. If that's all you have, that's fine, but there can be some discrepancies in there. If you check this box, it says that you're going to attach it. If you leave it blank, it goes to the vesting deed or the owner's title that they're actually going to deliver to the seller. So I would prefer it be on the title company than on you guys as far as determining what that actual legal description is. Even if it's listed in the tax records, I would still rather the title company verify that that's the actual right thing. Because especially on vacant land, we may have a meets and bounds kind of description versus an actual plot land. And if that's the case, if we've got a meets and bounds, a foot difference in entry makes a big difference in the property. So we just need to make sure that, again, I would prefer that not be part of your thing that you're giving to this transaction. I would rather it come from the title company. This date, just like the employment agreement, indicates the date that this contract expires. When the client signs this, it becomes the effective date, but this will be ending at 11/59 on, so if we had a 6-month listing, it would end on 12 December, or actually it's supposed to be December 12. I did it backwards. December 3, 2021. So if we were doing a 6-month listing, is how that would look. Listing price, what are we going to price this property as of the time this document is signed? So whenever we sign this document and whatever price we agree to, that's what we're going to do. If we change that price before it actually goes live, I don't really care because this is the amount that we agreed to as of the time this document was signed. Any special terms? Do we have, sewage being hooked up? Anything that's going on with the property that is relevant, we need to make note of it here. Shared wells, absolutely. I would make note of that somewhere in this document just so it's recorded, and we certainly want to put that in the listing as well. Owner acknowledges that the efforts and endeavors we're going to do everything we can to try to find the buyer, and you're going to pay us a percentage of the sales price. Now on land, it's not always the 6. Sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 3. It just kind of depends on what you can negotiate. And truly, in my opinion, if you're dealing with multiple lots, it makes it a lot easier perhaps to massage that number a little bit. If I'm working with one single property and my job is to try to get it sold, my marketing efforts aren't going to change, et cetera. Now, granted, I'm not going to have open houses. I'm probably not going to have professional photography done. So some of my expenses are less overall, but my work is not necessarily going to change a whole lot. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about, well, I'd probably do it for 4. Okay, is your time really worth 2% or is your time worth 3 or more, maybe even more? So just be conscious of that. So whatever you agree to with the seller is what we do here. Protection period, same as it is in the contract, provided that this client doesn't hire someone else and they end up selling the property to someone that looked at it while you had the employment, you're entitled to your compensation. But if they hire somebody else, you're out. In addition, if you're charging a flat fee to all of your agents or all of your clients, $250, $150, whatever that is, I would suggest you get it as of the date of the closing, because if you do it the effective date, you're going to have to hang on to it because it's got to be made to Keller Williams. We don't have an escrow account, so you're going to have to hold it till closing anyway. So I would tell you just to collect it the day of closing. And if you're not collecting at all, put a 0 in that blank and it's not applicable. So up here, we've agreed with this seller that they're going to pay us 5% of the sales price to sell the property. And I use that number specifically because that gives us an opportunity to think about this. Okay, we could split that 50-50 and offer 2.5% to us and 2.5% to a buyer's agent. Or if I really want to help my client, I could potentially offer, 2.25% or 2% to myself and a little bit more to a buyer's agent to try to entice them to get people to look at this particular blank piece of property. So, and I really have that conversation with rural properties. Yeah, I know you don't really want to pay a whole lot of commission on this, but here's the deal. It's going to take me some effort to get people out here. So we need to motivate their agents to make them want to come look at this property. And let's be honest, the way we motivate agents is by giving them money. So let's go ahead and try to offer a little bit higher compensation. Hi, Nicole's in the house. Am I doing something wrong? No. Okay, excellent.
Maybe.
Uh-oh, can people not see me?
No, you have people in your waiting room.
Oh. That's one thing I forgot.
That's okay.
All right. Sorry, Tyler and Amy. That's the technology being smarter than I am. Welcome. Good to see you. I'm looking forward to Amy walking away from her computer to go chase after her kid for whatever's going on in the background today. So we really enjoyed you at sales meeting the other day and look forward to it. Or I guess that was ALC. Either way. So you haven't missed much. We just covered the fact that this is up here is very similar to what you're used to on the residential contract. The only real difference is if you have, a section, township, or range instead of an actual street address, this is how you do that. If you don't have either of these, you can put C attached and then actually, oh, you're going to blank yourself out so I can't see you chase your kid. I see how it is. You can actually put C attached and then you could attach whatever, particular document that you had that described that property. And when you do that, just across the top of it, write out property address and utilize it that way. This is the date this agreement expires. So if we had a 6-month listing, this is be where it is. This is the price we agree to today, and any special terms, if there's a shared well, anything like that we need to put in there, make note of it there. Land is a different animal as far as sometimes compensation goes. Just make sure that you have agreed with the seller what you're going to charge, and make sure that it's enough that you can get people out to look at the property. Your protection period, same thing as in the residential contract. Same thing here about additional fees. If you don't collect it, it's not applicable. If you do, then I would suggest you collect it the day of closing. And we were just talking about if we did get a 5% commission on this property, then potentially we could offer ourselves 2% and maybe 3% to a buyer's agent in hopes that they might show the property to more people and try to get it moved for us. You can utilize that however you want to, but this is where we put, what we're actually going to be offering to another agent as far as this property goes and the compensation. Same as in residential. If I don't want to offer to somebody that's not in the MLS, which I don't know why you wouldn't, you could check that box. If they want to exclude Cousin Eddie, you can exclude Cousin Eddie as long as it's not for a reason of the protected classes. If Cousin Eddie's just a jerk, then they can keep him from buying the property. Motivating factors. Does the seller want to know why they're selling it? If you check does, you must have something in the blank. If you check does not, you can leave it blank. Can I talk about other offers to other agents? And may I speak about terms to that agent? So if we have an offer already on the table for $100,000 cash, I can tell the other agent, I already have 100 grand cash on the table, so don't bring me your $100,000 finance because it's not going to go. So I would encourage you guys to try to get does checked on both of those, just because it gives you the ability to have those conversations without having to go back to your seller and get permission to do so. They've already given it to you. Odds are most of the time this client is not going to be working with someone else. But if by chance they called you and said, hey, Don's not doing a great job with our listing, will you take over when his term expires? And mine happens to expire on the 15th of June. Then you would put that they are under an agreement on the 15th of June. And then you're going to come way back here to the end. Back too far. And in this blank, effective date, your effective date of employment would be 6/16/21. Question on the floor.
So
If you're extending your own, you're asking if you already have an employment agreement with them and they want to extend with you.
right.
Then all you're going to do is you're going to come in and you're going to amend the expiration date in this document and just have them initial off on it. So you would actually come back to page 1 and you would alter this date and put an initial box out here and have everyone initial it, and you've extended this particular contract.
Oh, so I don't have to do a whole new
You do not have to do a whole new one. And you can even do that here in the end under special agreements. You can put this employment agreement now to be extended to June 3rd, 2022, and have everybody initial off on that, and it's a valid document. And then just upload that as your new employment agreement. Okay. So back to this, if they were under employment with me and you were going to take over after mine expired, yours would be 6/16. Another example of this would be the seller says, okay, I want to employ you, but I don't want this to go active. So don't advertise it to anybody except within the 4 walls of your office, which you are allowed to do until the 16th of June, because I want to get it brush hogged and I've got a guy coming to go burn all those limbs. I want the property clear before we have people looking at it. So your effective date would then be 6/16, because they don't want it shown or active until such time. Because once you have an active employment agreement, the MLS expects you to have your property actively displayed. Don't agree with, because in my opinion, I should be able to employ you guys as my seller at any point and be in your best interest. Until you're ready to list, I can still be watching out for your best interest, but you cannot put your sign out there until it's on the MLS. That's correct. Now, if it's the same day, it's fine. But I would tell you, don't have that sign out more than an hour or 2 before it's going to go live, because you'll get calls from people. Why isn't it on the MLS? Yes. Right. Yeah, they can find you. And the comment was, we put the sign out on Friday, thinking that we were going to be ready on Saturday morning. We ended up going through the weekend to get the repairs done, so it didn't go live till Monday. Well, that is a violation according to the MLS. Now, in your case, if you have actual signs for your building company, you could put across the top owner agent. That indicates that you are an agent, and they could contact you for more information about the property without your sign being out there. I wouldn't put your phone number on it. I would make sure your phone number is on the sign, and they need to call whatever company that is. And if that happens to be your phone number, that's okay. But I wouldn't put it on the sign writer. I would just put owner agent. And then that way you're not getting solicitation calls from other agents about trying to list it. And you might get calls from buyers about it as well. All right, so back to reality up here. So again, most often they're not going to be working with someone, so you'll leave this blank and move on. Owner indicates that they're going to provide seller's disclosures. Now, the only ones that they're probably going to fill out are the first mandatory 4, because there's not going to be plumbing or, drywall, any of that stuff, no basement issues, because it's a blank piece of property. Our E&O insurance will still require seller's disclosures to cover you on this property. So they'll have to fill out the mandatory 4 on the first page, and then they can choose to make no other disclosures. There is a soil section in the disclosure, so they could put that if they have that information. But you've got to have one in there. Owner indicates also in including the disclosures, just as in the residential contract, they don't know about any subdivision, HOAs, anything like that. There's no other adverse material facts, like say a sinkhole that they haven't done it. And to the best of their property or knowledge, utilities will be available to the property and in proper working condition. So this says all the utilities available. So if there are no utilities available to the property, that's okay. But what they're stating is if you're indicating that there is water and electric on the property, it better be functional. Okay. Owner represents they're not a foreign person. When in doubt, you've got a website here, but as long as they are a resident or a resident alien, citizen or resident alien, then they are fine. Owner's going to hold us harmless, provided that, for anything that they don't tell us about the property. So if they admit the fact that there's a sinkhole and they knew about it, or an underground cave, or a standing water issue, and it becomes an issue, as long as they didn't tell us, then we're absolved, because the moment they tell us, we have to disclose that to the other party. That's just part of being a realtor. We indicate with the seller that we're going to provide a marketable title at closing. We're going to split those taxes and utilities 50-50 unless the owner agrees to pay the taxes until X. And on a land listing, sometimes that is the case. They agree to pay for it sooner or later. And sometimes the buyer will say, you know what, I'll take over all the payments right now if we can get this done. So that date does sometimes fluctuate with bare land, because we don't have to have people moved out and et cetera. Earnest money, if there is earnest money and liquidated damages, if the seller keeps the money, then they're going to get their real expenses back. Then you would get real expenses back, and then you'll split the money 50-50. As with the residential contract, don't go open a bank account for all of that great earnest money that you're going to be making. You won't see a dime, but it's in there if there happens to be that situation. MLS, I'm going to file all of this information with the MLS unless you tell me not to, and I'm going to cooperate with other brokers and offer them that compensation we talked about on page 1. Seller is allowing me to do whatever advertising I would normally do to the property unless they, prohibit me from doing so. I don't necessarily love how this is worded, guys, but because of what they've essentially done is copy and paste the residential contract. So a lot of the things that are in here, like family photos, paperwork, and other personally identifiable information, you wouldn't necessarily have, I'm guessing, family photos out in the middle of a bare piece of land. Call me crazy, but they're essentially saying the same thing they do in the residential contract. Seller is agreeing that we're going to allow access to this. Anything the seller doesn't want seen or taken, they should remove from the property. So if they do have a piece of farm equipment that they keep out on that land just because it's easier and they don't want it inadvertently stolen, they should probably move it from that property. If they happen to have cameras and they record people out on the property, that's on them. I don't want to know it as your agent, because anything you tell me, I've got to disclose. And I always tell my clients, don't listen, because whatever they say is just going to make you mad. Nobody ever has good things to say about, they are always nitpicking the property and they're just going to upset you. So, and if any litigation comes out of you listening to that, I'm absolved, because I'm encouraging you not to listen and I don't want to know. Legal professional advice. I am a realtor by trade. I am not a tax, finance, survey, soil, geo, hazardous, or anything else dealing with any of those issues. If you don't have those people, I'm happy to help you locate those people, but I'm not going to answer those questions like, I don't think that you should worry about that sinkhole. I would never say that. We'll get whoever needs to specialize in that, and we'll have them look at that. If you happen to leave this contract when we had a ready, willing, and able buyer, and I have to pursue you legally for my commission, you're also going to pay for my legal fees. We are part of a franchise. Mr. Seller, I'm going to show this property to anyone that wants to see it. If you choose to preclude any of these particular classes from looking at the property, please find someone else to represent you because I cannot do that legally. When I enter into this contract, I have the seller's best interest at heart, wholeheartedly working totally for the seller. When the seller signs this entire 7-page document, they are hiring Keller Williams, the brokerage. And then Keller Williams, the brokerage, designates you, the agents, to be the person to talk to this particular client. And then Jim or I sign here. So whomever is licensed that will be talking to this client needs to be on this particular document other than Jim or myself. So if you're working in tandem with someone, if you have a team, if it's whatever, if it's just you, then it'd be just your name. But anybody that's licensed that will be talking to this client needs to be in these blanks. Now, Mr. Seller, in the event I find a buyer that is looking for this particular piece of property, I would like the opportunity to represent both sides of that transaction. Now, Mr. Seller, pretend that there's a giant wall down the middle of the room, and I can't disseminate any information from one side of that room to the other without permission of the other person. And I normally bring the clients back here to these last 2 pages and actually show them what that means. That means I can't tell you that the buyer's willing to pay more. I can't tell the buyer that you're willing to maybe accept less. I can't tell either of you what the motivating factors are. I can't tell you that the buyer might have other financing opportunities, and I can't tell the buyer that you've got other financing, potential for them. And I can't tell them about any other terms of the offer. In essence, I can't tell anything from one side of that wall to the other without permission from the person whose information that is. And I truly also tell my clients that in the event it becomes an issue with me being a dual agent, you are in first position. So since I am your agent first, if me bringing someone else into the transaction causes problems, I'll refer that second person off and go back to working solely for you. I think that I am professional enough that I can work both sides of the deal, but if ever you feel uncomfortable, I will refer it out and we will separate. So the main thing is I want you guys to have yes checked here. That yes, I can be a dual agent. And yeah, because I'm a dual agent in Keller Williams' office, I am going to be a designated agent as well. Transaction brokerage, no and no. Transaction brokerage means that you're not going to advise, consult, direct, give any opinions of any kind of thing. You're just going to fill in the blanks with the number that that particular seller gives you. So we've already entered into this contract as the seller's limited agent with their best interest at heart. So we have already advised, consulted, negotiated. We've already done all those things. And in order to convert back to a transaction broker is really difficult because now I've got to go from giving all this advice to completely shutting down and just giving you, filling in the blanks for you. Really tough to do. If you have a client that wants you to be a transaction broker, we can do that, but I would like to talk to you before you do it. So in essence, I would just say no on both these because Mr. Seller, in the event that, you just want me to be somebody that's going to fill in the blanks, I'm going to refer you off to somebody else because that means you and I are not getting along. And that's the way I explain that because I'm always going to want to advise you. And if you're not going to let me do that, I'm going to find somebody that can. Okay. Do you have any personal interest in the property? Are you buying this property? Do you already have ownership interest in the property or are you representing a family member? Immediate family member is parents, siblings, and children. Personally, I put down cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents. It doesn't matter to me. There's no reason you shouldn't know this is a member of my family because I don't ever want it to come up later and have that be an issue. Are there any special agreements? As I've told you guys before, and this really applies more in residential than it does necessarily on land, but any restrictions that this client is giving you about the property being able to be shown, I always make note of that. So, if we can't show the property during high water, I'm going to make a note of that because, A, that's something I need to put in the MLS because if it's high water and we can't get across it, that's something I need to do. But that also tips off the fact, well, why haven't we had any showings? Well, because we've had to tell people they can't come look at it in high water. And maybe these people are concerned about the fact that there's going to be water on the property, so they haven't even looked. So I just make note of all of those things. And again, any special terms, hey, they need to use the gate on the north side of the property instead of the one on the south because the one on the south is kind of rickety and it falls apart. Great. I make a note of that so I don't forget to note that in the MLS as well. Signatures, thanks to Missouri Uniform Electronic Transactions Act, we can be anywhere in the country and sign this from anywhere in the country, and it is valid and truly the world. It is only valid in the state of Missouri, but it will, like I said, we can sign this digitally from anywhere. Check this box right here. And the reason why is because that box allows an email from this address of your client to go to the email of you here and say, I want to reduce the price of that property from 100 to 90. And you can go make that change in the MLS. Now, currently, compliance still requires, where I'm waiting on a couple other things and we'll have this done. Compliance still requires that we have a data sheet addendum that the client has actually signed. Ultimately, you'll be able to turn in that email as that document because all we need is the seller's permission. This contract gives us that permission that the seller can email us from one address to the other and it's valid. So I'm going to make that valid. I just haven't gotten that done yet. But so currently the best part I like about it is I can be driving down the road, get that email, make that change and go on about my day. And then if, like I said, currently we'd have to have that document for compliance. The timing of that doesn't matter because I've already got permission based on this contract. So check that box because it allows you to communicate electronically and still have it valid. It's up here at line 247 in section 17 under signatures. Again, effective date normally will be blank because your effective date is going to be the date that they sign it. If they're under another agreement or need to postpone, that is when you would use that particular blank. BW goes here, owner's signature, their printed name. Obviously, we do want their email address. Date will be auto-populated with their signature. And obviously, we want to perhaps capture their address here because they probably aren't living on a blank piece of land. Normally in a residential, it's pretty easy because we've got their address on the first page. Your signature, your name, your email address. As always, I don't care what you call yourself as far as your title goes. It's not compliance required, and your date will be up here at your signature. Super agent, yeah. I mean, whatever you want to put on there, it's it. I would. It's probably the best idea. I'll put it to you this way. Compliance-wise, it doesn't matter what's in that blank. For you, that's probably best practice to put owner agent since it is your personal property. Okay. And, you know, truly, you're going to be signing on both sides of this document anyway. So that, I mean, that should be fairly obvious. And then the last two pages are just, here's what I am when I'm working solely for you. Here's what I do when I'm a dual agent. And here's what I will never do as a transaction broker. All right. So again, not a whole lot of difference between that document and the residential employment agreement. And you'll see much the same thing when we get to the actual contract. It looks very similar as well. They've just eliminated some of the boxes. So again, we've got who's the buyer that's going to do here. If the land is within the city limits, then you put that city here. If not, then you leave that blank. Again, street address. You may not have an actual street address. It may be section, township, range. It may be something else. If you need to attach it in a different way, just put C attached, and then whatever document you create, write street address across the top, and then write that address or whatever that document is and have everybody initial off on it. Legal description, same as it is with the employment agreement. I would leave it blank so it is the responsibility of the title company and not you. Inclusions and exclusions. Here's your first big difference in the contract. You notice we don't have that giant laundry list of everything that's supposed to go with the property. So we need to be very diligent about what is and is not to go with it. Because as with the other one, this contract, not the disclosure statement, MLS, or other promotional material, provides for what's in this sale. So to avoid misunderstanding, list below as included or excluded any items which may be subject to question. If it's not in the four corners of this contract, it does not exist. So if they had indicated that they're leaving the brush hog equipment and, you know, the playhouse on the back lot, okay, then we want the brush hog equipment, whatever that is, of no value. Those are three big words to the lenders because the lender wants to loan money on the piece of land, not the piece of land and the stuff. So anything that's of value, I would put of no value after it. Then if we didn't want that play set, then we could eliminate that here, that it's got to be removed. We want that excluded from the property, so they need to remove that. If you don't have enough room here, if it happens to be like a blank piece of land connected to a hobby farm and you're just going to happen to buy, anyway, anything that's of value you can put here. Most often in land, it's probably going to be blank. As with the residential contract, purchase price, seller concessions, and earnest money. And seller concessions, just as with before, tells you to go to section 10. So if I've got a buyer asking for $2,500 of seller concessions, what does that mean? Well, we come back here to section 10. And it indicates that the buyer is responsible for items from 256 down to 268. So these are the items that the buyer is going to be responsible for when it comes to closing on this property. The seller will be responsible for these items right here. And then the parties are going to split these particular fees here. And you'll notice that these are a little bit more than are in the residential. Everything up here is pretty much exactly the same. But here they've put, if we've got property royalties or anything that's being paid off. So let's say they've leased out the land for someone to hay the land, and that particular agreement extends through the closing. Any deposits or any money that is entitled to whoever owns the property, that's supposed to be split 50, whatever that time frame is based on the year. Same thing, if we've got a dock fee or any utility charges. So there's some other things that are split 50-50 on the land that aren't in the residential contract, but it's still the same thing. Whatever duties that we will essentially share throughout the year, we're going to split based on the time of the year that we close on the property. Otherwise, these are the things the seller's got to pay for, and these are the things the buyer's got to pay for. So if we ask for the $2,500, it's going to go for this section here first, and then if there's money left over, then it will come down here and take care of whatever the buyer is responsible for down here. And then if there's money left over, that money goes back to the seller. It does not go to the buyer. The other thing to note is in those seller concessions, it does not include the cost of a home warranty, which bothers me. Why do we have a home warranty in the land contract? Because there's no home. You can't warranty a piece of property, but you can't pay for a home warranty. Title fees paid by the seller. So the seller these expenses that the seller has are not part of your seller concessions, as well as any brokerage or transaction fees. So that $150, $250 that we talked about on the first page has to come from your buyer. Cannot come from the seller. All right, so we've got our list, we've got our offer price, we've done our seller concessions, and if we've got earnest money, great. If we've done it, then we've provided it, and we've got the receipt acknowledgement, which is at the end of this contract, or it's going to be delivered to whom no later than 10 days. This one has not changed. Residential contract is 5 days. This one is still 10. So please make sure that it's in there. If there's additional money, there's a special rider for that. Make sure if you are the one with the earnest money, you deliver it and get a receipt for it. Who's going to close the property? Who's going to close it? Which location? And the month and the day that we're supposed to close it. If you don't know, you can put to be determined in there, but at some point I have to have a close date. Because if I don't have a close date, I don't have a default date. If I don't have a default date, I can't defend the fact that someone didn't perform on the contract. So if you do to be determined, just make sure at some point that you have a regular close date in there. You're probably not going to have, residential lease or possession possession after, but you might have a buyer go ahead and move onto the property, move their equipment there prior to closing. Be very careful with that. But if you have that, I don't have as much issue with possession prior and after with the land as I do with property. Not responsible for keys. It's really funny, but make sure if there's padlocks on the gates that they change the padlocks, because guess what? The owner may not be the only one that has those locks and or that combination or however that access is. And unless otherwise indicated, we're going to be, free of ordinary wear and tear, free of debris and personal property. So if there's a giant trash pile, that should be expected to be removed. Appraisal and financing. If there is an appraisal on this property, please check the box, because that's the only thing that allows you to get out based on appraisal. Carry this time frame through to your close date. Just in the event we need to go back and reappraise for whatever reason, make sure that it's carried through. If there's an issue, we'll issue the appraisal notice, and then we've all got 5 days to get on the same page, which I think 5 days is plenty, because either we'll get on the same page or we won't. Financing. Are we doing any other things not contingent upon financing? Now, that doesn't mean that the buyer can't go get financing. It just means that a lender can't call me and say the buyer can't get financing, so we're killing this deal. The buyer's going to show up in one way, shape, or form with money to close the property. Non-conventional, far less used, obviously, in land, but if there is some way that we can actually purchase that under one of these, you'll attach the actual particular rider that goes with that. Or conventional, if it's not cash, the one that we'll use. Carry your time frame for them to get all of their loan contingency stuff done through closing as well. And I think you guys all know how I feel about giving out the information of my client. So to be determined by lender. All terms. You don't have to be whatever. All terms. That's what I put in there because I don't think it's anybody's business. If compliance kicks it back, I just put basic information in those blanks. Because to me, it's none of my clients, nobody's information, how my client's paying for the property. So if it passes without termination, buyer's obligated under the contract and must have available funds. Title and survey, just as it is in residential. We've got 10 days, which is probably enough. I've been hedging my bets a little bit with 15 just to make sure. Normally, seller does the search and buyer pays for the insurance. At this particular contract, we can do it where the seller does both the search and pays for the insurance. So if we had a buyer that didn't have any ready cash, this would be in addition to the seller concessions as well. So they would pay the $2,500 on page one, as well as the owner's policy for the new buyer. We could say that they're going to split it 50-50, which sounds great, but on paper, most often one is going to cost more than the other. So somebody's going to come out ahead and somebody's going to come out behind. C is the traditional, what I would call the traditional way. Seller does the search, buyer pays for the insurance. That's most often what you're going to utilize and most often what you'll see. If I had a buyer offering a lower price on this particular piece of land, but we say, you know what, we'll pay you cash, we'll close in 10 days. And you know what my buyer will also do? They will do the title search and pay for the title insurance. You don't have to pay for anything. That would be the instance where you would use that. Who's going to issue that title policy? Oddly, or not oddly, most often it's going to be whoever's holding that earnest money. So make sure that we're getting that, whoever's got that, who's going to actually do the title search and provide that. If you are doing a survey of the property, which comes into play more so obviously in blank land, the contract gives you 20 days to review the title commitment, including any other restrictions, rights of ways, easements, and all recorded documents the buyer may attain, and deliver notice to the seller. The chances of you getting a survey done and the report written and getting it back in 20 days could be a stretch. So I would encourage you, if you are getting a survey, to carry that time frame through to your close date as well. Because that way, if you happen to get it late, then we know that we still have time to make an objection if there is, because on a land, again, a foot or two discrepancy on the legal description can make a giant difference in the actual size of the land. So we want to make sure that the survey matches that. And it says we're going to deliver that within that time period. If you happen to be doing D, where your buyer is paying for both, then that's the only time this blank applies. Otherwise, you can ignore this because, again, it says if 6D is checked. So if 6D is checked or not checked, you can just leave that blank. If we have any objections to this, then we've got to deliver our objections, and then the buyer and seller essentially have, or the seller has 7 days to say whether they're going to fix that problem or what they're going to do about it. If the seller fails to respond, then they have deemed to refuse to agree to correct any of them. So if during that 7 days, either the agent calls and says, hey, they're not going to fix anything, or that 7 days lapses, the contract terminates and everybody goes back to their starting point. Buyer gets their earnest money, seller goes back to not having a contract. However, contract allows 3 days by default for your buyer to say, you know what? We know there's a lien on it from the city for $1,000. We really want that piece of land. We'll take it with the encumbrance on it, and we will pay for that particular lien ourselves in order to close the property. So the contract can terminate and the buyer can raise their hand up to 3 days later and say, you know what, we'll take it, but we'll pay for that lien. Okay. So it's kind of a odd period in there because at any point your seller or your buyer could raise their hand. Most often, if you've got a situation where the sellers refuse to do something, the buyer's probably not going to do that because it's probably something significant. You know, 500 to 1,000 to 1,500 bucks. The seller's going to lose more than that, not correcting that, than they would if they defaulted on the contract. Okay, all that's the same. Again, they've pretty much stolen the residential and put it into this contract. But it says, you know, I've got property being sold in its as-is condition. Seller agrees to have any qualified inspector or appraiser selected at requested by the buyer, as long as we give notice in advance to the seller. So they can inspect or appraise or have it inspected on the buyer's behalf. They agree to immediately repair any damage. This is more significant in a blank piece of land, because let's suppose that we have to go look, and I've got one of these recently where there was an old septic tank. The house is burned down, and now there's an old septic tank on the property, but the buyer still wants to know if that works. Granted, they're buying a blank piece of land, but they've got the right to inspect any and everything on that property. Well, now there's a grove of trees that have grown up around this. So their options are either to not inspect it, or if they choose to take the trees down, they've got to replace the trees with exactly the same thing, which is tough to do because they're extremely tall. So, odds are they're not going to get that done, but anything that is destroyed. So if I run trucks across the land to go inspect it and end up rutting out the property, I may be required to replace that if there's not already roads. So just keep that in mind, that if I cause damage and it doesn't close, my buyer may have to fix whatever that damage is. Property data, same get out of jail free card as in the residential contract. You've got 5 days by default to inspect anything, including but not limited to zoning, subdivision, covenants, association, rules, regulations, financial, square footage, improvements, which there's not going to be any, presidents, sex offenders, criminals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The smaller this number is, the better your offer looks. Because truly, I can get out for anything in that 5-day time period. So if I've got a California client that wants to buy this blank piece of land, I've gone out there and I've given them the full screenshot of the land. They love it. We drive out this weekend to go look at the property. We're driving across it and he sees at the corner, there is 10 feet where this giant power line goes right through the property. Doesn't touch the ground, but this giant and we've got towers on either side, and he's had a bad experience with that. He can get out of the contract for that. The magic words, including but not limited to. Get out of jail free. So again, the smaller that number is, the better your offer looks. And if you get an offer that's not there, you can counter that if you choose to do so and say, property data line 128 blank to be 0. You have that right. If your client is concerned about these things and hasn't had a chance to look at it, they absolutely can do that. But just explain it to them. We need to find out as much about this as we can before we make our offer, because the smaller that number is, the better our offer looks. They can obtain any kind of inspection reports that they want to, including but not limited to all of these things. So again, I had a blank piece of property. There's a septic system from an old property or an old house that was on it. I still have the right to inspect that. The availability insurance must also be obtained during the inspection period, including flood insurance, which is more particular on blank land, and any premiums that they may encounter as purchasing this property. Inspection notice, I've got blank number of days to 10 by default to submit my report. Chances are on a blank piece of property, you may not even be doing any inspections. I mean, the buyer's going to walk out there and see what they're getting, and you may not be doing anything. If you are doing anything that's going to require some time, just be mindful of whatever that time frame is. So if you need to have somebody go out and inspect 40 acres of fence, that might take more than 10 days. So just kind of calculate that and figure out what it is. Yes. Yeah, if they're requiring a perk test or a soil test or, an erosion test, any of those things that they want to have inspected to make sure that the property's valid, and you may have to actually extend that through to closing. It kind of depends on what those tests are. And if you're going to have those, then I would contact those particular entities and say, how long, what kind of time frame can you give us? And if that's 3 weeks, put 3 weeks in there. And then just explain it to the other agent. The reason my inspection period is so long is my client wants a full soil test done. So we're going to go out and we're going to go out and pop 7 different places and send it off to get it inspected. Okay. Because the buyer may submit only one inspection notice. It must include all matters unacceptable to the buyer and a copy of all relevant inspection reports and specialist report. So if we went out there during the inspection period and we had somebody just kind of walk on the land that knows the land and says, you know what, I don't like the way that particular patch of land is all dead right there. I think I would get that checked out. I'm not an expert in that, but I think I would get that looked at. That could be our actual specialist report notice. And hey, we've got to get somebody out here to check the soil. You just need to let them know everybody agrees to 5 days per the contract. I don't think this will come into play as much in the land, but 5 days is probably plenty, because if you need to negotiate more time than that, you're probably going to end up doing that anyway. Okay. And then we've got the option to say, hey, I'm satisfied with all the inspections. There's things that I want fixed. There's a hole in the back fence that I want repaired. Or, I'm just going to walk away from this contract because I don't like the way the soil test came back. If I check this box right here, just as with the residential, I have to give them the ability to try to correct whatever that problem is. So if there's a drainage issue, here's what I want to have done. I'm going to submit this report, and you've got the option to have somebody come in with the backhoe and dig this out and have the drainage corrected. Seller can choose to do it or not, But if I don't check this box, the buyer can just walk away. Also, in this particular contract, we've got the waiver of inspection rights is still here. This used to be in residential and they took it out. What this means is the buyer can still do all the inspections they want to, but they cannot request any repairs. If this box is still unchecked, it doesn't matter because they have essentially waived their right to complain about any condition of the property. I would prefer if this said as is, but they've done it this way because it's not the fact I've waived my rights to an inspection. I have waived the rights indicated to me up here about the things that I can ask for. They can still do an inspection. They just can't ask for anything. Should you have them check 161 depends on what they're going to do. If they're going to take the property as it sits and not, if there happens to be standing water in the back corner and they're not going to worry about it, then you can check that and just let the seller know, hey, we're just going to take it as it sits. But that doesn't mean that your buyer still doesn't have the right to go have somebody look at that. So truly, that's a matter if your client's willing to take it as it sits, regardless of what they find out. You can check that. It does make your offer look a little better because again, then it's saying, I don't care what I find, I'm still going to buy the property. Or I don't care what I find, provided my lender still gives me the money. I'm not going to ask you to fix anything so I can buy the property. Resolution period, if there are issues, we've got 10 days to get on the same page. I think that's fine because if we can't get on the same page in 10 days, or there has to be other things done from the seller, we're probably going to agree to whatever that time period is anyway. Who's going to, in that time period, we've got to determine who's going to complete and pay for any issues, or if that seller is just going to give us money in lieu of it. And at any point, as with the residential, the seller can say at any point, hey, I'll fix whatever you want. And or the buyer can say, you know what, forget it, I'll just take it as is. Note that a monetary adjustment may affect the buyer's down payment, interest rate, and private mortgage insurance. So if they are getting money from the seller to correct the problem, make sure that we are conscious of that lender is actually knowledgeable about that. Municipality, you can skip this because we don't need to worry about this because there won't be any municipal inspections around here. Broker role, I'm going to do everything I can to try to move this contract through, as will the other broker. And you're not going to rely on me for anything outside of my realm. If you need that, I'm happy to help you. And you know what? You're going to hold me harmless if anything bad comes from the inspections or anything that happens with this property, provided the person that made the statement or did the thing was not employed by me, provided I didn't tell you that you had to use ABC Survey Company and nobody else, and provided that I didn't know something that I didn't tell you. So if I knew that there was a sinkhole on this property and you did an inspection and the previous seller didn't disclose it, and I knew about it and I didn't tell you, and later it's found out that I did know, then I'm liable. So again, disclose everything you know, but provided the person wasn't employed by you, you didn't say that we had to use it, or you didn't withhold information, then you're absolved of any litigation that comes up out of that. Earnest money is the same as it is in residential. If there's a dispute, then the escrow holder can get a written notice of mutual release. We can file a civil action. We can get a court order. We can get anything that may be required by law. It can sit for 365 days. Earnest money just goes on and on. But if we have an issue, this is how we handle it. Loss condemnation, same thing. If we have an issue, this is how we handle it. And this one's a little bit longer than the one in the residential because it has more information about just the blank land. And I'm not going to go into the legalese of it, but we've got the same rights here that let's suppose we had a vacant piece of land that had a gorgeous forest in the back, back 40 that we were planning to, kind of clear out a little bit and have as a hunting land. And then we have a tornado come through and it wipes out that entire area. Well, then your buyer has the option, to lead the contract. Your buyer has the option to reduce the sales price. Your buyer has the option of requiring the seller to try to repair that in order to purchase the property, which in that case probably wouldn't happen. But let's say we had a pond and it ended up getting a hole. The buyer could request that hole be fixed in order to purchase the property, and then the seller can either agree to or not agree to. So this is, again, all the legalese that gets us, if there's an issue before closing, of what we do with either insurance money or reduction in sales price or getting out of the contract or anything that happens because of some catastrophic event. How do we deal with it? Adjustments, closing costs, we talked about this on page 1. These are the things the buyer will pay for. These are the things the seller is responsible for. And these are the items we're going to prorate. Everybody agrees to a 1031, just as in the residential contract, that if the seller chooses to 1031 their money, we're all going to participate in that. It's not a big deal to the buyer. It's a couple extra pieces of paper and everybody moves on. Once contract is signed, it cannot be changed, altered, amended in whole or in part, except by in writing by all parties. And again, I say, if it's not in the 4 corners of these 8 pages in this one, it does not exist. So if you want it, it needs to be in here. If you want it gone, it needs to be in here. Default and remedies, just as it is with residential. Seller has the option, if we had a ready, willing, and able buyer, and the last minute the buyer says, nope, I'm not going to buy it. Seller has the option to sue them for performance. Excuse me, if the seller defaults, I did this backwards. Buyer has the option to sue for performance, saying, you're going to sell me this land. They have the option to mutually release that client and receive any expenses, including earnest money, back. So if they put down $500 of earnest money and they spent $750 on a survey and they've done $300 of their own title work, they're going to get $1,500 back from that seller if the seller defaults, which is a great conversation to have with the seller if they're mad about the $500 lien from the city. Okay, well, you can either pay the $500 from the city, or you can be in default and pay $1,500 to the buyer. Your choice. And same thing with residential. I really think this should say and or here at line 324, because we're a litigious society. And even though I may have let you out and terminated the contract up here, that doesn't necessarily preclude me from raising legal action against you. So I can enforce the contract, I can let you out and get my money back. And as I like to say it, and or I could sue you. If the buyer defaults, the seller can sue for performance. You've got to buy it. They can let the buyer out, retaining only the earnest money. So if the seller has had expenses on title work or whatever, they don't get that back, because the contract sees that as money they will ultimately utilize in the future, because if they sell the property to somebody else, that expenses are going to be absorbed there, and or pursue legal action. If there is legal action pursued, the prevailing party is going to get their legal expenses paid. Seller's disclosure statement, either the buyer got one, the buyer wants one, or the seller's not providing one. Again, in our office, we've got to provide one, but you'll have some that just, hey, it's a blank piece of land. There's nothing to disclose. We're not doing disclosures. Seller is also indicating that if there's anything that comes up between now and closing, I'm going to disclose it in writing and make sure that they know what's going on. And if I've done anything false or misleading, you can hold me harmful for that. Walkthrough verification of condition, again, a little bit less important, so to speak, in land, because you can probably drive by it and see that it looks all right. But again, if we were supposed to have the pond fixed and we got a giant rain last night, I might go look at the property to make sure the pond's holding water. So you've got the right to do that. And if there are utilities to the property, they can do it up to 4 days ahead of time. To me, I think this is a silly line in the contract, because if the buyer wants it and the seller agrees to it, it's probably going to happen with or without the contract, and maybe more than 4 days. It just kind of depends. Signatures, same thing. You can sign from anywhere in the world, and it is valid in this contract. This contract's only valid in the state of Missouri. We're all going to follow the law. If you ask me to skirt the law in any way, shape, or form, I'm going to go somewhere else, and I've got to make sure that I do what I can. And if you try to skirt the law, I may have to report you. Notices, anything that's notices shall be delivered in writing and shall be deemed delivered to the seller upon delivery to the agent, broker. So notice to the agent is notice to the client. I should have expectations when I send you a document that it is the same as if I sent it directly to your client. If you have any extra documents that we need to attach, this is where we do that. Any special agreements, property to be mowed days. And when you say, and specifically, and I just tell people this all the time, if you request mowing, indicate when you want that done, because they could go mow the property today and it's still before closing. And if you close in 45 days, they have fulfilled the contract. So make sure that if you do something like that, but in blank land, it might be more applicable. Do you have personal interest in the property? Are you a party of the transaction? Do you have ownership, immediate family? How are we getting paid? Seller is probably paying the commission. If you are on the buyer side and you are doing a transaction fee of 150 or 250 bucks, remember, seller's concessions cannot pay for that. So the buyer has to pay for that. So you would actually be receiving that money from the buyer. So if you're not doing a transaction fee, you would just have seller. If you were, then you would be getting money from both sides. Regardless of which side of the contract you are on, we are talking about a seller here. So you would be the seller's agent and a designated agent. If you were writing the contract, sorry, if you were writing the buyer side, then you'd be buyers and designated. And if you're doing the seller, then you'd be seller and designated. KW's license number, your signature, your printed name, your license number, the date. If there's an MLS ID with the property, you can put it there. It's not necessarily required. Franchise, if we're part of franchise, the big franchise is not responsible for, it's just our local office. We're going to report all of this information to MLS. Same thing for in person. We're only going to represent those that are allowed to purchase and sell this property. Don't sell to terrorists, please. Deadline date, up to you. As with residential, it is not required. If you want to give a deadline, you certainly can. You do not have to. Time is of the essence. Everything is a 24-hour day, 7 days a week. So if I sign a contract today, day one begins at 12:01 Friday morning. Today's Thursday, right? 12:01 Friday morning, and that is day one. Day one does not begin at noon today and go till noon tomorrow. It starts at 12:01 at night and the next day. So technically, a lot of times, if you sign a contract early in the morning, you actually get a bonus day on your time frames because today doesn't count. Okay. And then as with residential, either the seller is going to sign if they accept, they'll reject, or they'll counter. This document still has the earnest money receipt. So if you receive earnest money, this is where you put your signature, your printed name, and the date, and then you take the earnest money receipt to the title company and get it out of your hands. All right. And what's the new MLS login? Flex MLS? It's not Flex MLS.
No, hang on.
You. But how about Somo in front of it? What do you say?
Yeah, that's
Password. Oh, I bet I changed it when I redid all this. Well, I've had another one, and then when we changed to just the single one, I went back to the one that I use most often, and yeah, it'll take me a minute to do that. And if you guys haven't done your auto pay, make sure that happens, because as of the 12th, or as of the 11th, the billing goes out and they've changed their pay system. So if you had something set up with the board, you need to go back and change it because they've got a new system. So I will also tell you, if you walk in the door over there, Ashley at the front desk will do it for you. I know that from experience because I did it on the way in today. And I'm going to bounce through this pretty quickly because this is really pretty easy. So just the same thing as we would normally do. We're going to add a listing. If you're working with the seller, yep, just leave it. Do me another one. And then instead of residential, we're going to come in and put land and lots. It's going to require an address. And I'm not even going to go through this one, guys, because I'm just going to show you the difference in this and the residential. I mean, it's got far fewer fields, which makes sense because there's far fewer information than we need to list. Ponds and barns and springs, lot size, acreage, is there waterfront? Is there any kind of carport? Marketing remarks, directions, status, and then the details, again, far less. Our commissions up here at the top, lockbox type, if there is one, or how we're going to show this property, where's the key, easements, restrictions, lot improvements, outbuildings, utilities, fencing, lot, water, is there an HOA, how are we going to sell it, and financing. So obviously, you know, we don't have the flooring, we don't have the heating, we don't have those giant fields that we would normally have. And there's also not a rooms blank. But all in all, the entry is almost the same thing as a residential. It's just so much less information. So, and truly on lots, most people are expecting less information, but I would also, as always, tell you to put as much information about that lot as you can, because the more you do, the longer your listing is. So that is the long and short of the differences and kind of what we're looking at. So what questions do we have, both online? Amy and Tyler, if you guys got anything, let me know. And or here in the room. Oh, there's even more. Gage Brown's on there too. Gage, sorry to miss you. I didn't see you down there. If you got questions, just type them in the chat box or unmute yourself, guys, either way. All right, I don't see any chat boxes. I don't see any questions. Hope you're actually paying attention. Oh, good here, says Tyler. Thank you. You betcha, Tyler. Thank you guys for being on. I don't think I've got anything else for you today, so I'm gonna probably shut down and bid you all a happy Thursday. And if you got questions, Tyler, I'm not sure if you and Gage are in my phone or not. 417, and I'm not sure that you're in my phone either, are you? Write down my number and then just text me your name. You don't have to put any other information because I'll know what it is. 417-827-6275. 417-827-6275. Just text me your name. That's all I need. And then I'll put you in my phone. So if you need something and call me, I don't think you're a telemarketer because I don't answer if I don't have you in my phone. So absolutely send that to me. And like I said, have a great weekend that I think starts tomorrow. I think it's Thursday. We talked about that. So, all right, team, carry on. Appreciate you.